and welcome everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is Adam from the N+1 podcast and Miller's Custom Guitars. Today I'm joined by a really cool guest and someone I've known for, Ryan, 20 plus years. Can you imagine that it's been that long?
Crazy. Life goes fast, man.
Yeah. And this is the great thing. I love having Ryan on. This is my guest, Ryan Loche. Welcome. Every thunderous applause. Thunderous applause. Ryan, I can't even remember the title of your current job. You were telling me just a second ago, and it's so big. Yeah. It's so big. To say it again, what is it your current job is?
There's a lot to it. I'm the academic director at the Belonging Co. College here in Nashville, Tennessee, and then we're a regional campus of Southeastern University based in Lakeland, Florida. So, yeah. Academic director.
This is amazing. This is so cool that this is your thing that you are doing. But Ryan and I go way back, and this is so great to have you back on. But do you remember, Ryan, when Desiree and I were dating, and you helped me record a love song for Desiree? Do you remember that?
I do.
Remember you had that you had that studio in your house, right?
Yeah.
And I was like,
ADAT there, the 8 tracks.
Yeah. And so Desiree had written me a poem, and then I turned it into a love song, and it was our 1-year anniversary, and I, in secret, recorded it, and I would drive all the way over to your house, which was literally, if you're in Modesto, from where I lived, if there was any place in Modesto that was farther from my house, it was your house. They were literally on the exact farthest end from the house. But we cranked out a couple weekends where I drove all the way over to your house, and we recorded this love song for my wife. Then we made an anniversary trip to the Bay Area, and I made this like mixtape of all these love songs, mixed CD of love songs, romantic songs and stuff. And we listened to it all the way there, and we had dinner. It was really romantic. And then we listened to it all the way back, and the last song was this song I recorded for her. It was a total baller move, and I have to you thank for that. And here we are. That was almost 20 years ago, and Desiree and I have now been married 20 years. So I have you partially to thank for that. So thank you.
Well, there you go. I mean, I'm like thinking back at the whole scope, like when I was going to be on this podcast with you, I realized the times where I led some worship with you for the old college group at the church we both went to. That was like kind of I did worship in high school with a chapel, and I never really had any intention of doing it as a vocation. But really, like those few times were kind of like the start and burgeoning of what would now become my life's goal. I'm working on a degree in worship and did 20 years of worship pastoring, and so fun times, man.
I remember you back then. You know, for me, like, I just always want a guitar in my hand, right? And specifically, I grew up in the church playing worship, right? And so if there was ever worship that needed to be played for a church thing, I just always wanted to be the person that did that. You know, you were there, and I was like, for me, I've always wanted to be inclusive on those things. And so, come on. And I just remember you were so, like, timid and shy at the time. You were just kind of like, I'm over here, man, and that didn't last long, because here you are 20 years later. You've been a worship pastor. You are now an educator, a full blown yada, 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 whatever you do now. Like working on a PhD and all that stuff. But I'm so glad that you joined us today, because we actually wanted to talk about worship, because I wanted to start a mini series that's talking about the modern church. And, this podcast is about hobbies, passions, obsessions. It's about a little bit of everything. And I'm passionate about my beliefs. And, I'm a Christ following person. I think nowadays that tends to come with some bad connotation sometimes. And I'm a person, I believe that, that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and that the Bible is full of the truth, and that they're still applicable today, and that God at his core wants to have relationships with people. But, the church just has this bad rap in today's modern culture. And I was very interested in talking to modern pastors and worship leaders and church leaders, and to see, how they're maybe dealing with that change, how they're trying to fulfill the Great Commission, which is at its core, in my opinion, like all, like the main job, right? Of Christians everywhere. And I wanted to talk to you on because, as you mentioned, you've had a 20-year-long career in worship ministries. Right. And I just wondered if maybe we're going to follow the format of the questions, and we're going to intersperse some of that leaning the topic direction. But if you could talk to us about worship. Okay, this is a big topic. Okay, but talk to us about worship, right? What even is it? Right? Describe it as like, you can start as like talking to a 5-year-old, right? You have some kids. You have like, you have like a lot of kids, right?
I got a lot of kids. Got 4 of them. Yeah, the youngest one's 7.
Okay. So talk like you got your 7-year-old, and he goes, "Dad, what's worship?" He or she, I can't remember what your youngest is.
Yeah, this was she.
Okay,
yeah, cool.
your daughter, 7-year-old daughter says, "Dad, we're singing. What the heck is going on? What is worship?"
Yeah.
And start there, and maybe you can go up from there. But what even is worship?
Sure. Yeah. And this is something that I was just talking to my students about this last week. But now that I'm like well on my way, I'm just doing my dissertation at this point. So I've got all the coursework behind me for a PhD in worship. And I would have thought going into it that I would be able to, answer this question more succinctly than I would hope. But now it's the Dunning-Kruger effect at this point. Like, it feels like the more I know about it, the less I can really like make it tangible. So like, okay, so this is the PhD trying to dumb it down. I'll go real high for a minute.
Just imagine how quickly and easily you would have been able to answer this question when you were 22. Man, you would have had answers so quick, But,
right. Yeah, because at the face value, like when you come to a church, like, oh, it's the singing time. That's worship.
Of course.
And that's kind of like, that's what everybody says. But yeah, it's so much more deeper than that if we're getting like theological and we're going, like for me, I always camp on Romans 12:1, where it's to live your life as an act of obedience. That's your true and proper worship.
Okay.
That's kind of been my core thing. So if I'm telling my 7-year-old, what are we singing? And this is kind of like, well, we're singing together to honor God, and we're giving worth to the Lord, and we're praising his name, and coming together and doing that as a group, as a church, as the ecclesia, as the called out ones, as, I guess I wouldn't say ecclesia to the 7-year-old, but if we're all coming and like singing, like we're coming together, we're called to come together as a church and to sing together, to honor the Lord together. So, I mean, in a roundabout way, worship can start as just singing. So as the 7-year-old, we're going to talk about that. But the more you get to know the Lord, the more you grow in your faith with the Lord, the more you realize that singing is just a small tip of the iceberg for worship, and really just our entire lives are meant to be honoring to God and to live in obedience and to do everything he asks of us and to walk with the Holy Spirit and be open to what he has for us. Like, all of that becomes worship. It really is central to the entirety of Scripture, really.
Wow. Yeah, that's...
I'm trying to think, like, how do you do? I really do need to figure out the stock. Like, I need easier
I
answer.
feel like, hey, we have a big God, and if it was an easy answer, then we wouldn't, have this debate, all these thousands of years later,
Right.
We talked a little bit about 20 years ago when I was playing on the lawn at, I don't remember where it was, and you were there. Was it at a park or something? But how did you really get started into leading worship? What was your gateway drug? Because I know you guys were musicians at your house. I know because I showed up and recorded a lot of songs in your studio there. But how did you kind of make that shift from being a musician to wanting to play worship to being a worship leader and making it like a career path for you?
Sure. I mean, I remember like going way back, my parents started a contemporary service. It would have been like 1991. So I'd have been about 10 years old at that point. They started a contemporary worship service at the Lutheran church I grew up at.
And at that time, for most people, contemporary, that just means that there's drums, right?
Yeah, I mean, realistically, back then it was like songs. For those who are like way into it, it's like "Lord, I Lift Your Name on High," the old Maranatha band, like all those songs, which is great because I
cannoli. Did you have any cannoli in
eventually.
There? Run cannoli.
Had some cannoli.
Nice.
Yeah, we served cannolis. It was great with Hershey syrup and everything. It was fine. But my parents did that. And I remember they would turn our living room into like a rehearsal space, and then the band would come practice there every week. And
that's so fun.
At 10 years old, I didn't like it. I remember being like actually upset, saying like, why can't we just have a normal living room? And so it wasn't until I went to Christian high school, elementary school. I was in a Christian high school, and for whatever reason, I just decided to pick up the guitar. I was 15, had a friend that was playing guitar, and it looked relatively easy to me. And I was like, well, I'll give it a shot too. And so I took some lessons because we had some guitars at the house. And then from there was involved in the worship team. There were some great mentors of mine, Brian Kitchen and Brian Nixon, both two Brians, yeah, but like just great mentors that encouraged me to get into there. Fun fact is Brian Nixon, where is it? I got one of his books right here. He's a PhD too, and he's been guiding me. I've rekindled a relationship with him, and I've been, getting his guidance while I'm working on my dissertation because he did one too.
Nice.
But yeah, so the two of them got me into it. In high school, I didn't think that I would make much of a career. Like I felt like I could be a worship leader maybe, but I just thought it's probably not going to be something that I'd be able to make a living off of. So tried to do the family business for a little while, a lot of sales, and just wasn't really good at that. And then kind of milled around a bit, and that's where I kind of ended up in the college group where you and I met.
Right.
And, the Lord really kind of continued to draw me into worship, and then eventually I got offered an intern position at a church for the youth ministry, and yeah, I hung on right there. That then youth pastor was now the lead pastor of the church, and so he gave me a job, and I just kind of hung on for 20 years.
It's good. Yeah, a lot of times for us, it starts in youth, doesn't it?
Right,
where you get that
always.
first taste of leading. It's like, we don't care if it's not that bad. You can lead in worship. You can lead in the youth
Right.
group.
That's where we go.
Yeah. That's awesome. Okay, so this is going to get back to tying in with our overarching series theme of trying to connect to the modern culture. What are the misconceptions that you have, or that you've come across with being worship and being a worship leader, especially when it comes to the modern culture?
I mean, there's so many. I guess there's a few angles we could take for the misconceptions. Like I think from like a worship leading standpoint, now that I'm teaching like worship majors and business, like I'm teaching people that want to be worship leaders in some of the classes, there can be a misconception that worship is just that kind of concert vibe at like a bigger church with all the lights and all that, when really it is a lot more than that. And then like we were saying, like if my 7-year-old is asking what worship is, I think the misconception can often be that we just call singing worship, and then we kind of make each one in the same. If you go to like most of these churches, you'll often hear like a guy come up for offering time and it's like, we're going to continue our time of worship through offering. And that's kind of like a churchy way to try to make it like help you understand that worship is more than just singing.
Right.
So I guess, the misconception would be that worship is just music. Is probably the big one in a lot of ways. And then, from the professional standpoint, worship leaders thinking that their entire role is to just go do that 20, 30 minutes on the stage. Like they're paid to do just that.
Sure.
And I try to help people know, like worship leaders, we should help our churches, those, people that we're working with, try to help them understand that worship is more than just singing. Because then, roundabout way, the singing becomes stronger because everybody's not really thinking about the singing, and it kind of flywheels itself there.
Yeah, I remember my worship pastor saying he's a full-time worship pastor, and he's like, music is like a quarter of what I do, and like the job of being a pastor, and all that entails, shepherding is 75%, visiting people in hospitals and, counseling and, the other things that are all entailed with being a pastor, leading people and shepherding sheep,
Right.
And I thought that was really, really interesting. And I feel like as worship leaders, and I'll say this, and I'll just throw it out there. My background is I'm a worship. I always consider myself like a worship musician, right? I'm just like a dude playing guitar. I love to like lead, like be the person singing. I just don't like have the vocal chops to like really do it. I've never been a great singer.
I doubt that. I've heard you sing. You were fine.
That's the thing. Like, it's fine, right? I don't have a beautiful voice. I have a voice. I can hit notes, right? I don't have a beautiful voice, right? And I love to lead worship. But I've always said this going back, 20 years of playing worship music, that in my heart I believe that every person that's on stage is a worship leader, and I've always acted like that, as even just a dude holding a guitar. I've always believed that everybody that's serving on the sound team, on the the slides, the ushers, they're all part of the worship team. I truly believe this, because if one of those things is amiss, it's going to mess up everything, you know? And
Right.
so, you know, that's part of, in my opinion, part of the training as like a worship pastor, as part of the shepherding that goes on to train your team, that like, hey, just because you're, let's say, for example, just because you're just holding a bass, sometimes bass gets looked down on. I'm guilty, I look down on bass players sometimes. Just because
No,
you're,
they're awesome.
bass is some of my favorite musicians are bass players, right? Just because you're holding a bass doesn't mean, you know, that you're not, you know, critical. Doesn't mean you're not being a worship leader. Doesn't mean that, you know, all these things. Doesn't mean that just because you're over running slides doesn't mean that you're not a critical component to creating an atmosphere that is helping to lead worship. And then the other thing I would say is that, you know, what we're doing, you know, it's like, hey, I always say this to people. We play worship because it's fun, but that's not why we do it. Like playing music, it's fun. Playing worship is fun. I love doing it. But we're tasked with leading people to the throne room of grace. You know, it's like this burden, you know, that we need to take seriously. Right.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, that I was talking about misconceptions. Like if you just show up and, you know, to have fun, it's like, yeah, that's fine. But we need to take it seriously. We need to come prepared. We need to come with our hearts prepared, and we need to come ready to worship the Lord. And I always say that, I don't know where I heard this, but people only will go as far as you lead them. You know, we're worship leaders. You know, if we're not leading them into worship, you know, they won't go into worship, you know?
Right. Yeah. I mean, and that's something I think, maybe speaking of just misconceptions too, like when you talk to like real good, healthy worship leaders, worship pastors, they'll say, hey, my singing's, you know, a very small part of what my pastoring and what my leading is. But conversely, there's a lot of people who really see their platform time as kind of like that's what they're there for. And I think that can be a detriment to the church for sure, because they're not treating it with that, like you said, like they're not holding it with like a reverence and kind of realizing that the Lord's using them in something really big and wants to do something with them rather than, you know, having it be a showcase for your talent. I mean, pride's kind of the first sin that old Satan had.
Right.
So, I mean, that's kind of just creeps up, especially in the musicians. But I mean, that is a misconception. And unfortunately, that worship leaders, I think the statistics getting even smaller now, but a few years ago, it was like every 2 years, a worship leader tends to go find another worship leader job. And a lot of it, I think, has to do with a lot of this pride and kind of disenfranchised with, you know, they got into it because they were looking for an opportunity to utilize their musicianship. And I think even like you were saying, you feel like your voice is just all right. I think that in and of itself, in the entire, especially the American evangelical church world, I think a lot of like senior pastors are putting far too much emphasis on making sure that they're hiring worship leaders that have like whatever that it factor is. Like they're watching that YouTube reel before they're even looking at their resume or trying to have a conversation with them. They're judging people purely on their voice, which, I mean, you got to sound like you need to sound decent. You need to be able to hit the notes for sure. But I do think we've put far too many people on a pedestal because they have the talent, but they don't have the spiritual chops to back it up, and nobody's challenged them to do so. So I think that's part of why they end up bouncing from church to church every couple of years.
Yeah. That kind of leads us right into the next question, which is, as a worship leader, what do you consider some of the biggest challenges, especially in the kind of modern culture today?
Yeah.
Especially reaching the modern culture.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that just bouncing off that, like reaching the modern culture, I think is a burden that it would feel like every worship leader tries to run after. And then there's just all of the typical fights. Like you can see memes on Instagram about it all day, about there's going to be people that are not happy with the volume of your team. There's going to be people that aren't happy that you have a drum set. Yep. There's going to be people that aren't happy that you're not wearing shoes on a given week. Like there's somebody going to be upset about what you're doing.
Oh my gosh.
So the biggest
awesome.
challenge is like, I mean, we can just rattle off all of the things, but I always those things are gonna come. My encouragement for worship leaders a lot of times is to really just start building relationships with your team.
Right.
To help them build relationships with your church, and you want to build relationships, especially, you know, we're talking like we want to reach the modern, like I think a lot of that needs to be built on really having strong relationships with some of the senior members at the church, especially as like maybe a young worship leader, worship pastor. The time that you invest in relationships gives you a lot more leeway. When I started at the church I was at, we had comment cards come in that wanted the young guy with the long hair and the red guitar. I had a little red Fender Strat at the time. They didn't want me up there. Like, it was like, he doesn't need to be there. And like, well, I guess there's no hair left at this point. I got a little bit, but no long hair.
You just outed
anymore,
yourself, man.
Yeah, but at the time it was real. I don't know if I was equipped to be mature enough to like, well, I'm going to go talk with that, senior. I had only been doing it for a couple years. I was emulating everything that I was seeing online, and like, I'm grabbing all the great albums from all the contemporary. When I was getting into it, it was like early Hillsong United and stuff like that was like the contemporary cool stuff. And so I was like, well, they're doing it, so I'm going to do it, and I'm happy with that. And looking back on it, I wish I would have had the maturity to be able to like really start digging in and building relationships, which eventually I started doing after like a few years of being there. But I think starting right there would have been good for me. But again, it's hard. You're 22, and how are you going to come in and you feel there's a little bit of imposter syndrome.
Definitely.
And then I guess it'd be like, don't let them look down on you because you're young in Timothy. First Timothy, so I shouldn't know the passage, but yeah. Anyway, rambling a little bit, but yeah, there's going to be tons of challenges doing worship ministry. And I think it's just important. Relationship is often the thing that's going to help. Yeah,
you mentioned, the comment cards or whatever. And I'm on a couple different worship leader like Facebook groups, and just like, people just aren't original, like they get the same comment cards all over the country all the time. Right. It's just the same thing. And I just love your approach, which is that, sometimes you get those comment cards and the people on those Facebook forums are just like, ditch the old people, don't worry about what they say. And your approach is, that's not the approach. The approach is to go make a friend, because sure. The relationship is going to bridge that gap. And I think that's really,
and whether you're a worship pastor or a leader, like, you're still pastoring. Like, I think that you need to pastor those people,
right?
Not stiff arm them. Like, yeah,
right. And like you said, if you're being a leader, we need to lead all the people, and right. We're all God's children, like, we need to get everybody together. And, I know that one of the big things you always hear as a worship leader, especially from the older folks, is, you don't do enough hymns, or whatever. Right. And I always loved doing hymns, but I liked to do them funner, like kind of the David Crowder approach. You would jazz them up, spin them around and make them fun.
Yeah, Tomlin's Amazing Grace.
Right, yeah, that kind of thing. And for some people that they don't like that even. They're like,
you messed them up.
Yeah, you messed them up or whatever. But to me, that's like, when I was picking songs, it's like, I'd like to throw those songs in there, to try to, not just to try to appease people, but because I really like these songs, to try to be inclusive, to try to get everybody on board.
Right.
I don't know. I just feel like that challenge of, you don't want to alienate people. If we're sitting up there and then worship's over and everyone's just thinking about everything that's wrong with worship, everything that they're mad about, we definitely didn't succeed. Like, right. We're trying to make an environment that's conducive to worship. We're trying to help people to worship the Lord, and they're just mad at us. It's not good. It's not good, man. Like,
yeah, I mean, what you said too, like, you want to try to have like a broad selection of music. I have a great the professor that is the chair on my dissertation, I remember in one of the classes I was in, was talking about in Ephesians 5:19, it talks about singing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. And he was saying it wasn't necessarily like Paul telling us to pick, something from each of those categories, but he was more saying like be broad and blended, like nice. Minister to the entire congregation.
I like that.
And that always like stuck with me. And then the fun thing too that I like to take some of my students down, when we're trying to actually like say what a hymn is, like in the strictest sense, it means it's in a hymnal. And at this point, Shout to the Lord's in a hymnal, and you wouldn't consider that a hymn previously. And then, then one of the songs I always go to is there's a song in Christ Alone by the Gettys. You would think it's a hymn just by the way it's put together, but that song's only like 20 years old.
Right.
And so it's just like, so it becomes,
right.
Will you win someone over by trying to argue with a senior saint with this? No, it won't work. But it is kind of fun to like kind of play around, like, what do you mean by hymn? And it usually means the songs that you grew up in.
Right.
Like the songs that you sang when you grew up, which for me as a Lutheran was way different than the Baptist friends I had or the Pentecostal friends that I had.
Which is so weird because the songs I grew up singing, I can't stand. I hear those songs and they, to me, are so cringe. I just like, those songs are so old and awful. Like, why would we still want to sing those? There's new songs and they're great, like why,
Fair enough,
but no, like the people, they just want to sing the old hymns, and that's fine. This is one of my favorite questions, which is what fills your bucket? Why do you do this? And this, to me, I feel like for worship leading is so easy. Right? Yeah. Why do you lead worship? Why are you a worship leader? Why did you make this your career of 20 years? It can't be the money.
Right. No, I ask myself
Ryan,
this question
it cannot
every
be the money, right, Ryan? Why do you do this? What fills your bucket?
I remember my senior pastor, when I was just becoming licensed as a pastor, sat down and he was saying, if you can do anything else, do that, and really seek the Lord. And I was like, really, like, took me off guard. Like, this is the senior pastor at my church said, "It's like, hey, before we license you, let's talk." And like, what? And he was like, you need to find, like, if you can do something else, do it, because the burden of ministry, when you really want to take it to heart, is heavy.
Nice.
And like you said, like, it's not glamorous, which I guess, as I said that, like, it is a problem because a lot of people are trying to make it glamorous. And I think that's part of the problem, is we're trying to turn it into something that gives attention to ourselves. But yeah, I mean, I really, when I was younger, I just didn't see success in anything I was doing other than music. And then specifically music for the church. And I've just loved training others. I love equipping others. I've always got a heart of a teacher. Even when I was in worship ministry for 20 years, it was always training young people and old people. Like, it's just training up musicians and meeting with them and giving voice lessons and giving music lessons and spiritual guidance. And so now that I'm a teacher in worship, that's kind of just the natural extension of being able to kind of just influence more people and speak into more people. So I guess it fills my bucket to do that. I like to read a lot too at this point. I don't know if it's an enjoyment or an obligation, but it's whatever it is, I'm getting through it. So
yeah, I like to read a lot, but I can only read like epic fantasy. I can't read nonfiction, man.
Yeah,
we just
I
got
do some of that too.
we just got the Lost Medal from Brandon Sanderson, just showed up today, so I'm very excited about that. So,
that's cool. Yeah,
this is also one of my favorite questions, and I don't know, this might be interesting coming from you, which is we talked about challenges, but do you have any notable, like, bad experiences? Like, so normally, it's like, hey, do you have like a gig that went awry or whatever? But especially in this situation, hey, we're dealing with people, we're trying to lead them, and sometimes there's a lot of pain involved. Do you have maybe a bad experience that you can share that comes to mind?
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm trying to think of the ones that would be the best to like share in a way
just
that's
maybe something that's funny, or maybe there's something that's just that comes to mind, or it doesn't have to be whatever, but
Yeah. Well, I think like you said at the start of this, there's a lot of misconception. Actually, I take that back. It's not even necessarily misconception. There's a lot of people that think poorly of the church for a lot of appropriate reasons. Like, a lot of people in the church have done stupid stuff and have misrepresented the bride of Christ, misrepresented the church.
Definitely.
And then people have judged the church and God based on what some people have done. And that's just like the whole, I mean, arguably that's kind of like the core of deconstruction, where people are just like undoing all of their faith. And a lot of that has to do with, there probably wasn't a need to deconstruct if there wasn't things wrong. And then the problem is this deconstruction kind of spills out and we tear the entire Bible apart, and we just tear all of it down. And so, yeah, I think if there's, I've got just a few people in my life that were just doing great ministry, and then there's church hurt that comes along, and now to kind of see the way some of them reacted and what they're doing in life, it's a bummer that God didn't really do it to them, but they think that God did it to them because one of God's children, or supposed children, who knows, like one of God's people had done something that offended or kicked them out, or they got fired, or didn't get to do in worship. It's like, I didn't get to do the songs the way I wanted to do the songs, or I didn't get to lead my ministry the way I wanted to lead my ministry, which ends up being a clash with a senior pastor and a worship pastor, and which one of them was wrong. And senior pastor wins because he's there the longest, but it doesn't necessarily mean he's right. And then worship pastor quits and never wants to go back. And so just seeing that throughout the church, for being here 20 years, there's a lot of that all around.
Yeah, and one of my old pastor had a saying, which is, I think, too poignant, which is that sheep bite. Sometimes the sheep they're not always kind, and sometimes they bite, the people in the church, and it's rough, you're trying to navigate that. And just because we go to church doesn't mean that we're fixed. We're all broken, which is why we're at church. And sometimes we need to remember that, and we need to have, grace for the people that are there, and sometimes that's, sometimes we need grace. I know I need grace all the time. So what do you consider maybe the Ryan Loche signature move when it comes to leading worship, or maybe leading people, or maybe you might consider it maybe like a veteran move, something that you maybe haven't seen very many other people do it, but it's something that you do a lot, but you think your ways may be better.
I know when I started, it was fairly controversial to convince the leadership to let others lead worship.
Oh yeah,
that's not a novel idea
nowadays.
But like I remember I had a very little bit of an existential crisis for the first 5 or so years of being in worship ministry, because like I tried to be a songwriter because everybody had an EP, little album. Everybody was a songwriter that was a worship leader. Everybody had an album to sell. And I tried to write stuff, and those songs were terrible. I still don't think I ever wrote anything that was good. And it bugged me that I couldn't do that. And I never really had like that bombastic leading voice. Like, I'm fine with my voice. I'm happy to lead, but maybe similar to you, like I wouldn't sit there and say I like have one of the best voices, but I learned very quickly, like maybe it was from starting in youth, and I had just a great batch of young people, like always a part of my ministry. Like I loved giving them opportunity to lead and play. And there's a lot of messiness to that. Letting them make mistakes and all that on the stage. When you're at a typical evangelical church, we don't like mistakes because it makes us look unprofessional, and it picks at that whole production value, and what's worth more is realism or the production value of a church service. It seems like we're swinging well towards people just want the real thing now, which just blesses my heart.
That's wonderful.
It's kind of cool to see it kind of moving that way.
Yeah, I'm definitely all for pushing people into as much leadership as they can handle. I've always done that. I kind of like you. I've served a lot in youth, and you find those kids. They're just they just want to play music. And you're like, okay, you rope them in. You kind of trick them. Yeah, we're playing music. You're like, oh, haha, we're leaders now. You gotta step up.
That's how I got involved in high school. Yeah,
exactly.
They did that to me. Like, you want to play? All right.
Okay, well, let's get into the next question. Do you have any leading? Do you have any like guilty pleasures, like something that maybe if someone caught you doing it, they might be like, if another worship leader was to visit and you were leading and they were like caught you doing, they'd be like, what in the world is Ryan doing? But you don't care because you do it anyway.
I like to mix jazz chords into progressions that tend to, if the whole band's not doing it with you, they clash, but it's okay because I just hear myself. I like to mixture plagal progressions. So instead of going to I'd like to mixture plagal.
What is that?
Yeah. So instead of going to a 5, we'll go to a 4 and then a borrowed 4, a minor 4 from the other key. That's a plagal cadence, and then mixture is like borrowing a chord. So
that's too much theory for me, man.
1 to a 4 to a minor 4 here. Do guitars pick up okay? Is my guitar in tune? Yeah, so you go 1 to a 4.
Oh, sure.
Kind of thing.
Okay.
A little like walk down. Yeah, everybody knows, and it's magical. It just makes for beautiful little harmonies. There's a new, what's the song, Gratitude by Brandon Lake. He just does it in there. So, and then Delirious, the old band with the question mark at the end, they have it in a lot of their stuff. So
I always called them Delirio 5 because it's not an S, it's a 5.
Delirio 5, yeah.
Delirio
5. That's great.
Dude.
Yeah, so they do a lot of that.
Delirious. Dude, the thing about Delirious, you forget how dang good they were. You put their albums on, they totally hold up. They totally rock. Those albums totally rock. Put those albums, guys, listen to Delirious. Those albums hold up and they still rock. Put them on. Listen to Delirious.
And we had Martin Smith on our last Tibico album. He just came and did what's that? My Heart Burn? No, it wasn't that. Which one of the songs? He did one of his great songs at our church.
Obsession?
It was great.
That's Obsession, right? Is my heart
good too.
That is My Heart Burns for you, right? Obsession.
Yeah, I don't think that's the one they did. We'll keep talking, and I'll find it while we're talking, because this is going to bug me.
Wakens the Dawn. That's a good one. Oh my gosh, that song rocks so hard.
It's a slow one. Oh, it was what a friend I found and Obsession.
Oh yeah,
Jesus. Yeah, he put them together. So there's a great
my gosh.
There's a great little YouTube video of him singing "What a Friend I Found" and "Obsession" at our church earlier this year, and it was just fantastic. So,
oh my gosh,
big fan of Delirious, big fan of Martin Smith.
So good.
Stu G is he's the godfather of worship guitar. You could arguably, or probably not even arguably. I don't think you can argue with that.
For modern worship guitar, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, there's the United guys, but Stu G, he's the guy. He's at a church. It's fun being in Franklin. I know he's at a church just up the street from me. So nice. I need to go say hi.
Yeah. So you've been leading worship for 20 years, worship leader. Yeah. What do you consider maybe your favorite or best moment? What's the thing that you look back at and go, man, that was just so amazing that happened?
Probably. So I've got a nonprofit organization that founded coming up on 10 years now called the Church Collective, which is a resource for worship leaders. And one of the things we've done, which we haven't done since COVID, but we're going to be doing it again next year.
I'm very upset at you that you haven't done this. Come on.
I've been trying.
Hey, you coming back to Modesto?
That's the plan. Yeah.
Oh,
Modesto or Turlock will be back. Yeah. That's the plan. But,
tell us about it.
The biggest moment is one of the last. I mean, every conference is incredible, but I've made just lifelong friends in the people that help facilitate the conferences, or even you, seeing you every year, being able to come to the conferences. I think those conferences are a great culmination of the heart of the Church Collective was to offer conferences that could be free for the entire team to come to, because going to any conference tends to be a ton of money, and a lot of churches. Kind of excludes churches and their teams when you're going to expensive conferences. So our thing was let's do it local, and let's give local worship pastors and leaders the opportunity to lead sessions as well, because they have something to bring to the table. We're all doing it. So really just giving people a voice and coming in there, and then, just seeing those days go together, and, taking group photos with people. It's always just all these people, and then you see them all in person. And like I've said, I've got lifelong friends through the Church Collective that I still talk to each and every day. And I'm looking forward to getting another conference in, but that was good stuff.
So if you are listening to this and you have no idea what he's talking about, which is probably most everyone, because, being a worship leader is kind of a very niche thing, which is what this podcast is all about. They run these conferences. You call them, one-day conferences or whatever you call them?
Yeah. One-day conferences,
You do them in a couple different places. You do one in Modesto because that's where you were based out of. You did one somewhere else, right?
Yeah, I've been in Virginia Beach is the other. Those are kind of the hubs, West Coast, East Coast, because one of our founder guys, name's Chris Bellamy.
Right, Bellamy.
He plays saxophone for Zach Williams now too, which is fantastic. But
that's a big job
over in Virginia Beach. Yeah, it's a big job. He's great. He's probably doing it as we speak. He's probably playing saxophone right now. But we would do Virginia Beach and then Modesto, and then we've done Indiana. We've had teams go to Germany and New Zealand and stuff, and done some international stuff. But it's settled in on East Coast, West Coast before going into COVID. We had a West Coast conference the day things shut down. There were people flying back, and it's hey, you need to put a mask on when you get off the plane.
So I was at this conference, and first of all, this conference was happening, and I was actually I forced my way to be a speaker. I messaged you and messaged you and messaged you and messaged you. I was polite,
which I'm still terrible on getting back to people.
You kept not getting back to me, and eventually I was like, you announced the conference, and I was like, Ryan, I've been messaging you for 6 months, and you have not come back to me, but I have a thing that I think is worthy of being a class. And you say, well, what is it? You message Fox, and I messaged Fox, and you guys, okay, you're slotted, and that was it. But it was great. I really enjoyed doing that. But this is my favorite event of the year, right? As a worship leader, it's free. You guys provide lunch. Your dad cooks hot dogs. You guys.
That's great.
And so it's I try to tell all my worship leader friends, I've been to a couple big worship conferences, right? I've been to Sacramento. I've been to a couple big things, with big names, with Lincoln Brewster and a bunch of different things. And those conferences are always great, and you go and you learn a bunch of stuff. And
they're wonderful. Yeah.
I always feel like they're trying to sell you something, right?
Right. Yeah.
Right. There's shirts, there's merch, there's the flyers with, the Adopt-A-Kids that are all there, know, and they are providing the content that you're there for, but it's there's so many other things right? And I feel like those conferences are so focused, and it's just like, hey, there's no frills. It's just like, hey, we're here for us. The worship is so powerful and so good, and I'm gonna call you out. It's too short. You guys do like 2 songs and get out of there, and then 2 more songs and get out of there.
In the main sessions.
Yeah.
Right, fair enough.
So you have all these worship leaders. You have all these worship leaders, right? Who all they do is lead worship for others, right? And so they finally get to let loose and worship with like the best worship ever, and you just like kick them out. Anyway, I always feel like we need like 3 times that much worship. Anyway, but
always best to leave them wanting more, I guess, right? Yeah, that's good feedback. We'll add to it.
Yeah, so definitely more worship. But the music is so good, and I don't even know when you guys rehearsed because it's musicians from everywhere, from all over the country.
Yeah.
And then the content is so good. You guys have great breakout sessions, and you just provide. And every year I've gone, I've learned amazing things and ran into old friends and made new friends. So if you are check the Church Collective, they probably do you have any scheduled right now?
Not on the calendar, but we are, like I said, in the works. 2023 should see some.
One complaint, I only have one complaint, which is that you always schedule it the same weekend as my nephew's birthday, and so I always have to
so like
say,
early March or so, right?
Yeah, it's like early March, and it's like, hey, Justin, I can't. My whole family's coming down, and I can't go to your birthday. You know, he's always mad.
That's good to know.
But those are the best. Those are the best conferences. Yeah. Check them out. They're super good, and I always love them. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by my other YouTube channel called Miller's Custom Guitars. On that channel, I do videos that are all about modifications to guitars, teaching how to do setups. I explore guitar tone. I don't really do like demos. It's not really that kind of channel, but I try to teach guitar players how to get the most out of their guitars, how to understand their guitar better. And on a recent series, I'm trying to take a deep dive into the guitar tones of Brian May, and I'm having a lot of fun doing those videos. I spend a lot of time and effort trying to make those videos as high quality as I can, editing those and developing my skills and techniques as a video maker and editor. I write scripts and do a bunch of stuff. But I really appreciate it. If you are interested in guitar stuff, you could head over there and check out some of those videos. I'll put a link in the description, and you can just say hi and say, hey, came over from the N+1 podcast. You know, if you're not into guitar stuff, another great way that you could support this podcast is by taking this episode or any episode that you find interesting and picking one person, just one. I'm not asking a lot. Pick one person that you think might find that episode interesting and sharing it with them to help grow the show. We're trying to get this podcast off the ground, and I'm having so much fun making these podcasts, and we would just like to get our legs under us and get a listener base established, people that are enjoying the show. And if you know of someone who you think might enjoy listening to these conversations, whether it's with Jed talking about photography, or John talking about acting, or with Gabe talking about how we drank some scotch, or Josh how we prospected for gold using moss. If you think someone might find these conversations interesting, why don't you pick an episode and share it with one person? I'd really appreciate that. Anyway, we'll get you back to the show. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks, guys. Okay, so if someone's like, hey, I play an instrument, or I sing, or I think I can sing, and they say, hey, I really want to be part of worship ministries, or I want to be a worship leader, what advice would you give that person?
Read your Bible a bunch. Find somebody. If you're talking to me about it, I'll probably be the one to say, "Hey, let's go get some coffee" or something like that. And I mean, with me, it's with students that are kind of coming in, with Southeastern, there's a worship degree. Like, we're not just all worship majors. There's pastoral, and there's, business and psychology it's not all ministry either. But like, if you're coming in like 18-year-old, I want to be a worship leader, that can mean a lot of different things. They might be very well equipped musically, and they might be just kind of getting started. And like, if they're talking to me, I'll probably be the one, let's get some coffee. Let's figure out where you're at. And then, doing this for 20 years, I'm real confident in my ability to assess where you are musically and give you tips to get going further.
Are you going to give them the same speech? Are you going to tell them if you can do anything else, do that? Are you going to give them the same speech?
Eventually,
if someone tells you,
that's when you get the licensure, just to make sure, like, what are you going to all the, before you jump into that. I lost my train of thought on what was I going to say? No, you're fine. That's
I butted in with the joke. It derailed you.
It's great. That's fine.
More advice for people that wanted to do worship.
Yeah. So I would help let you know what you need to work on.
Right.
And then I was saying, like, the one caveat is I cannot help you if you're tone deaf. I've tried to help people who just are Lord knows I've tried. And I know people who are confident in their ability to help somebody who's tone deaf learn how to actually match pitch. And then I'll point you to them. That's the one. I'll point you to that person. Like, let's go figure that out, because I've tried and I just don't know how to. If I can't hit a note on a piano and have you sing it, I don't know how to get you there. But if we're there, I can take you far. But that's my one caveat. But there are people that are really good at it, and I still don't quite. I've read the books. I don't understand how they do it. But yeah.
Well, and I always say, the church is a big place, right? And it needs all kind of people to run, right? And so, like, you really want to serve in worship ministries, like, and maybe you aren't as talented musically as you think you are. Right? Okay. Well, guess what? There's tons of things that the worship ministry absolutely critically needs to function, and that you may be awesome at. So, like, maybe you're not as good at guitar as you thought you were. Okay. But maybe your love of music means that you understand how a soundboard works, or maybe you understand the musical cues, and maybe that means you'd be really good at running lights or something. There's a place for everybody serving in the church, and maybe it's not on the stage, on the platform, but I really believe that there's a place for everybody, and maybe they can eventually grow into the platform positions with working on the stuff. But I really think that they can use their gifts that the God gave them,
Sure. Yeah, and if you really feel like you want to be in worship ministry, I wouldn't just rely on just the worship leader to be that gatekeeper. Like, I would just go take lessons, take guitar lessons, take voice lessons, go make yourself better, because that just can't hurt. And I think that'll help. That'll go a long way. I've dealt with plenty of people who don't want to get better and then try to audition, and it's like, well, you're not quite there. Here's some resources. Here's some places you go to listen. They don't do it. But they'll wear it as a chip on their shoulder. Right. Oh, I didn't get in, and it's like, well, I'm trying to. You got to help yourself a little bit too.
Yeah, it's just like anything. It's a skill you can develop as a musician. I've been playing for 27 years. I am slowly, but I'm still getting better as a musician. Not very much, not very fast, but I'm still learning things. I'm still getting better as a musician. You can, no matter where you're at as a musician, you can get better. You can grow. You can improve whatever your instrument is. So I wanted to, and I don't know if you thought of anything, but I've been doing this segment on my podcast called Let's Get Into It, where we actually do a little bit of the topic. So, like, when Courtney Pong came on and we talked about improv, we did a little 5-minute improv game. I don't know if you thought of anything of something we could do that is in the realm of worship leading or anything. Did you think of anything?
It's kind of hard because we can't sync, right? I mean, the answer would be let's sing something together, but that's so difficult over the internet. There are apps that do it, but not this one. So I kind of came up short.
What about maybe something leadership related, or I don't know? And I always said, it might not work for everybody, but if we can't think of anything, we can't think of anything.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I'm sorry.
I can't think of anything. That's right. We can't always get into it. That's all right.
Trivia, jokes, memes. That's all in my brain. Always goes to memes, but I don't. Yeah. First worship leader in the Bible's name's He-Man. There's a little piece of trivia. That's not really getting into it.
Is that real?
Yeah,
is that real?
Look him up. Yeah, for sure.
That's awesome.
Like the first vocational one, his name's He-Man. Yeah.
Wow.
It'd be like He-Man, but He-Man. It's when you read it, it's He-Man.
Nice. Awesome. Okay, well, we're going to get towards the end here and wrap up and get you out of here. For Ryan Loche, what is N+1? What is next? I know you are working on your PhD. What is next on the docket for Ryan?
Yeah, so it's the dissertation right now. That'll be done hopefully by the end of the summer. I am currently an ABD, which means I've done all the schooling, all but dissertation. So I want to get that PhD, be Dr. Loche. That's the big goal. Love what's going on at our college. We're kind of growing gangbusters for our site, which is great. So just trying to equip myself as best as I can to help train others. I don't know. I'm a realtor as well, so just find an opportunity to help people get a great place while we're out here. That's kind of just like a side thing to kind of just help people out. But I think the big push is to just continue to equip myself, and while I'm training others, just make myself better to train others.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. We're going to ask you the 2 silly questions in just a second. But before we do that, I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming on the show. Where can people find you, connect with you, attend your whatevers? Where can people find you?
I mean, thechurchcollective.com will have everything for the nonprofit. Right. And honestly, most of what I do is there too, but you can find me on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. It's all Ryan Loche.
Okay.
And then the Church Collective on Instagram. We've gotten, on TikTok, we've actually gotten ourselves a heck of a following for the Church Collective, just doing small little guitar tutorials. And
I love your tutorials on TikTok.
That was like a pandemic experiment between myself and Chris, the guy that was touring with Zach Williams. So we just started making little guitar videos, and that's just ran off. So if you want little guitar pointers, 2 or 3 of them a day, Church Collective on TikTok. But Church Collective or Ryan Loche. The swimmer, Ryan Lochte's not as popular anymore. So if you Google Ryan Loche, I do show up a little bit. It used to just be the swimmer, because Google would think you were just misspelling his name whenever you try to find me. But
And if someone wanted to move to Tennessee and join up to be in one of your classes, what school is this?
Southeastern University, where the Belonging Co. College is what you'd apply there first, and then that'll lead you over to Southeastern University. It's a great school, great church. So you get your ministry experience with everybody here at the Belonging Co., and you get a solid accredited, bachelor's, master's degrees, doctorate. Like, it's a very well accredited degree that you're going to get when you come with us, which is something I'm really, happy and jazzed about, because, a guy getting a PhD, it matters to me that the degree, can go with you wherever you're going. So it's a solid degree.
Amazing. And you also have a podcast. We are fellow podcasters, and your podcast, man, we're going to jump ahead, because the question is the name drop, right? So I want you to casually drop the name of the most famous person you ever met. And I'm looking through your podcast roster of some of the guests you've had. You've had some
we've had them all.
Huge, especially in the Christian music industry, you've had some huge guests, but I don't want to spoil any. Go ahead and what do you think is maybe the most famous person you've ever met?
Yeah, I mean, so when I was prepping for this, my mind immediately, thank you for the podcast shout out, but my mind immediately went to, I've met Weird Al Yankovic twice.
What? Twice?
And so that's where my brain went. Because that was it. When I was younger. Man. Yeah, when like I said, when I was real young, I didn't like the musicianship. I didn't like that my parents had a band in our living room. I wasn't really into music. Weird Al was kind of my entry point, because I've always had I liked funny stuff. And
always loved Weird Al, man. Yeah. You gonna go see the movie?
Al was my stuff.
You gonna go see the movie? I think it comes out this week or something.
It's out. I think my parents have already watched it. Okay. Yeah, it's my dad was in there too, so he's the one that took us to. So we went to see Weird Al, multiple times. I've probably seen him 4 or 5 times, but
I've heard he puts on an awesome show, right?
Oh, it's fantastic. Yeah, I need to take my kids to it, because it's been forever. But the first time we went, we were just having lunch before the show, and noticed that he was eating at where we were eating, and we kind of just casually waited till he was done eating, and he kind of waved us over, and we went and got to talk to Weird Al, and it was crazy.
That's amazing.
And then and at another concert, 5 years later, we just hung around the stage really long afterwards, and got invited to the little, whatever meet and greet, and got to meet and greet Weird Al. So nice. I like Weird Al. But
that's awesome.
For the podcast, even being a part of the Belonging Co., and maybe just living in Nashville, you see all of these Christian artists for sure everywhere. And it's definitely a blessing to be able to talk to them on the podcast and kind of glean their wisdom. But I do love that they're all just great people generally, really trying to do the best they can for worship. And I think it's great to be able to know a lot of them.
I just want to real quick list off. I'm just looking at some of the guests you've had. You've had Stephen Curtis Chapman. You've had Lincoln Brewster. You've had Carrie Job. You've had Louis Giglio, Nate Parrish. You've had Cody Carnes, Sean Curran. If you don't know who these people are, you guys have not listened to Christian music. Matt Redman.
Or you know their music at church.
You definitely have seen their songs. Right. Zarling Jack, David Baloche. So Christian Stanfill. I mean, so just like the biggest names in Christian music and worship. So that's amazing.
It's been a blessing. Yeah, we put a lot of clips of them. We haven't for a little bit, but you'll see a lot of clips of those interviews on our Instagram account if you look it up. Church Collective, the Church Collective.
Okay, last question, and we will get you out of here. This is the big one. This is like why I even do a podcast in the first place. What is, in your opinion, the all-time greatest cartoon theme song?
Again, I'm torn. Greatest cartoon ever for me is Captain N, the Game Master.
What? What is this? I have not heard this.
You haven't heard of Captain N, the Game Master? What?
I have not heard this.
Okay, you'll have to. I mean, so I have to default towards that's like the best theme song, but it's not really a theme song. It's kind of just like an introduction. So Captain N is Captain Nintendo. He's a young man that gets sucked into his TV and like visits all the video games. And for a guy who grew up with the Nintendo, playing Legend of Zelda when I'm 6 years old, like a cartoon about a kid that gets to be in the video games. That's it for me.
All right.
But if not that, for like, again, the theme song for that one's not so much a theme song. It's got to probably be DuckTales, I guess.
Woo!
Would be to go for that one. Yeah.
We got a lot of DuckTales. DuckTales is in the lead right now.
It's usually DuckTales. Yeah.
So what is it? Captain N?
Captain N, yeah.
All
I can't believe you never watched it.
I've never heard.
You gotta go watch it.
Not only have I never watched it, I've never even heard of it, man.
That's incredible. Yeah. It's I used to dress up like him because he'd have a Nintendo controller on his belt and he could pause the people around him. And so like I did that. I wore that Nintendo. I took the guts out of my controller and I wore a controller on my belt. So
I believe that, Ryan. That sounds like a very low-key thing to do.
I mean, you can see. I still got the games right there.
Yeah. Look, it's confirmed you're very nerdy. We all know this. Okay. Well, Ryan, thank you once again so much for coming on the podcast. You've been a delight. It's been great catching up with you. Tell Charity hi. Give your kids hugs for me.
Man.
And until next time, thank you everyone for tuning in. I hope that you found this interesting. If you liked this, if you enjoyed it, share it with someone that you think might enjoy it. Check out the Facebook group, guys. We have a Facebook group that is really coming along. We got some good content on there, and we post follow-up questions. We post links. We're going to post the link to Martin Smith singing at your church. We're going to post that in the Facebook group. I'm not going to put it in the video. You have to go to the Facebook group if you want to watch that. Okay? So yeah. Anyway, until next time, guys, thank you so much for tuning in, and don't be a jerk.